Okay, we are back again here at allpointstv.com. And we are not here phoning it in or having another episode that we did once before played again on Labor Day. We come in on Labor Day and we labor once we get here. And you're going to see the fruit. You're going to see the fruits of our labor today as we do the final I think the final program we're going to do on the great song put out by Oliver Anthony. I think Oliver Anthony is the hottest thing out there right now. And he's hit a chord with the country with his song, Richmond, North of Richmond. And I think that song is resonating because it's feeling the country is feeling the woe that he's singing about, and I want to go into a little bit more detail with the content of the song, and I want to put it within the frame of the my favorite topic is to put things in the context of the great founders of this country, and I'm going to try to relate it back to what the framers were doing in Philadelphia, as you know, in 1787, when they had been sent there by their respective states. The 13 colonists, 12 of them, had sent delegates to Philadelphia. Rhode Island did not send anyone. They didn't think it was going to come out of it. But 12 of the 13 states were there, and in certain numbers from each of the 12 states, and they were there to rectify what was really a shortcoming in the Articles of Confederation, and the rectification of it was that there was just not enough power relinquished by the 12 polities, the 13 colonists, to the federal government, which was being created because the states were relinquishing some of their sovereignty to the federal government, and in that regard, then creating it. Don't forget the federal government is a creation of the states. And without them relinquishing some of their sovereignty, it would never have been created. So it was supposed to have therefore been subordinate to it. But they found out, of course, that the terms of that relinquishing some of the sovereignty to the federal government, it was so restrictive that the federal government could not do anything, and now they have to come back and try to find another way to do, on the one hand, restrain the government, and on the other hand, to allow it to do something that would be of the vested interest of each of the 12, 13 politics that were out there. I mean, you need to have a centralized authority. At the same time, they've experienced centralized power going out of control, and so it's a two-tiered. It's what's that little thing that has more than one head? You know, you have to, on the one hand, allow it to function. At the same time, you have to make sure that in its functioning, that it doesn't go out of control. And what government have you read about, and which one do you recognize today anywhere on earth, where the government that was set up to, in fact, carry out its responsibilities, which is, number one, to keep the people free, to secure the blessing of liberty to themselves and to their posterity, but to maintain their freedom. Which government, after having done that, if they in fact involve themselves in doing that, which one of the governments that you know of or have read about or see today on the planet anywhere that have stayed true to that mission that all governments claim to represent? All of them claim to be doing that. All of them got a lot of the most repressive governments got the the word in Democratic Republic of this and Republican government of that, and got nice sounding names in it, and all of them are oppressing their citizens. And so they have to come back then, having tied the federal government down within the context of Federalist Paper 51, written by the great James Madison, the lawgiver. And Madison had written very clearly about what they were trying to do, and he said that if men were angels, you would not need laws, because if they were angels, all you have to do is simply let them carry out the angelic, mission. There's a mission that angels are on to do good, because that's what angels are supposed to do. And if governments were made up of angels, there would be no, number one, there would be no laws have to be made against the angels, and you wouldn't have to have any laws if they were governing, because angels would not need laws to control their acts, because they would do things that are angelic because of the very nature that we assign to them.
But you know what? I don't think Adams actually, he overlooked a lot of theological viewpoints, is that there were such things as fallen angels. Those who actually rebelled against the rule of God.
That's a good point, John.
He didn't take that into account. He didn't take that.
That's another good point too. That you do have. I mean, even I guess even angels can. What's that? Fallen angels. There's a song out about that. Even angels, they're not God. So I mean, that's one thing about the 1-1. There's only one perfection, and then everything else is an offshoot of it. And therefore, since there's only 1-1, then everything that falls from that is less than that, but maybe in angelic terms it will be close to it, but not the same as. And so John's making a point here, and I think it's a very important point, that even angels can, in fact, have slippage. But the point that James Madison is making is that if governments were made up of angels, we could say this, and I think this could be said without it being contradicted, there will be less need for the kind of oversight that you need whenever fallen humans, you said fallen angels, the biblical text talks about the fallen humans that were given certain orders and fell down from the state of perfection that they were placed in. And this is the claim now. I'm just simply saying what the claim is. And if that were the case, you could assume then that you don't need to chain the governing body down. But if you do not have that, if you have fallen human beings running it, and they are carrying out sovereignty of the individuals, and there's a collection of them there, then you have to talk about how you're going to allow them to do that which needs to be done for the security of all of the constituent members. At the same time, you got to understand how that conglomerate of different interests coming together can collide and create chaos. And you got to have something that, in fact, restrain the impulse for these things to go out of control. And they have seen it go out of control, because the ones in that room are the ones these were not lightweights in that room. These are the ones that Ayn Rand was talking about, where she says in a book called For the New Intellectuals, she talks about how these were, I think it's around page 45 or so of that book, she talks about how the people in that room, the 55 members that were eventually collected in that room, were this country's first intellectuals, she says, and and at the end of her life, which was in 1982, Ryan was born in 1905 and died in 1982, so at the end of her life, she was still saying that they were, so far, she said, that the last intellectuals And I think that's pretty much the case even today.
Joe Biden certainly shows that through.
And Joe Biden is certainly not even in the mix of we don't have you. I tell you what you could do. You go back and read my article I did on one of the great politicians in the world right now in Hungary. I don't know if you've listened to this person by the name of Orban, Victor, Viktor, Victor Orban. And this man is remarkable. The president of Hungary. This man is really above. I don't think there's anybody in this country who can compare to him. I don't hear any politicians that have the depth of understanding this man has. This man is really smart and very analytical. Anything he talks about, you have to really strictly pay attention to it. I listen to the politicians here. I don't hear any depth in anything they're talking about.
Orban, I think, can speak English as well as Hungarian, and I see Joe Biden can barely speak English. I mean,
or a sentence.
Yeah, I mean, he can't even complete a sentence.
We don't have, and I don't hear any depth in any of the politicians. That's all of them. These persons that claim, they say that Ted Cruz is a constitutionalist, and he comes out of the classroom that at Harvard, that Alan Dershowitz was one of his instructors at Harvard University, and that right there raises my eyebrows, because I think if you're in that classroom and you have the understanding that Alan Dershowitz has, then you don't really have a good understanding of the Constitution, because I don't think Alan Dershowitz has a good understanding of the Constitution. He has a very good understanding what's. I think I look at him as a parrot. He has a very good understanding of what the Supreme Court has said. He can mouth those rulings that they made on the Supreme Court. I don't get the impression the man understands the Constitution, which is a whole different narrative in and of itself. I'll read some things to you about it later on. But I think that I think the reason why they're sung by Oliver Anthony, I think the reason why it resonated so much in the country, and it's still resonating even today, months after the song came out, is because he touched a nerve, and the nerve that he touched really is the patriotic nerve of the country. This is a very patriotic country. The problem is that the leaders are not patriotic. And that's why they have a problem with MAGA. Make America Great Again. How would you be able, how would anyone holding office be opposed to MAGA? If they are really patriots, they will be supporting MAGA, and they will be trying to make the country great again. But is that what they're doing? No, they're opposing MAGA. And when MAGA went to, and when Donald Trump, when they went to Washington on January the 6th, the patriots went to Washington on January the 6th. And when they went there to subsume the responsibility of standing up for the Constitution of the United States. They were there to make sure that the laws of the country were in fact enforced. They were not there to break the laws. Now, there was some law breaking going on there, but we now know what happened there. A lot of infiltration had occurred. And that riot that you had outside the building, the people that went inside the building, they've shown those pictures there. Tucker Carlson was showing it. I think it may have been one of the reasons why Tucker Carlson was fired. Because Charles Schumer and some of the others objected to him coming in. Carlson showed this person by the name of Shumley that went in that building. One that was wearing the horns, and they showed the video of this guy going throughout the congressional building, and they're going to try to act like this guy was in there part of the group that was tearing up everything and in there insurrecting, as they call it. You need to read my post today when I was talking about who was insurrecting. I wrote an article today, a two-part series I started today. I was talking about the real insurrection. I said Michael Pence insurrected on January the 6th. And I'm going to do part 2 tomorrow. I'm going to show that the insurrection was that of Michael Pence.
Definitely. I don't know why Trump chose him, because I never seen anything indicating he had anything of a backbone. He was a part of the elite GOP thing. I mean, he I don't know. Did it placate the Republicans? When Trump chose him? I don't think so. They were still vehemently opposed to him, just as much as the Democrats were.
Yeah, that's true. John, you're making another point. Biden was chosen by Barack Obama for the same reason that Trump chose Michael Pence, the former governor of Indiana. You know, here you have the East Coast and you have the Midwest. It was a marriage. Now, these political marriages are not made in heaven. They're not made for heavenly reasons. They're made for political reasons, and it's always about power and getting elected and things of that sort. You have to you're balancing out how do you do that, given the way in which the country is in fact divided, as they're now saying, between blue states and red states. We got to get rid of that stuff. We're all Americans in this country, and we've got to vote as Americans and stop talking about what kind of state, what color the state is that we're living in, and stop using these gang colors and act like gang members out here, where you got red and blue and the Bloods and this is the Bloods and the Crips. And we got to get out of that mindset. We all Americans, and we need to vote. If you vote as Americans, you vote the country's interests. If you are voting as Crips and Bloods, you vote the gang interests. And this is what these two parties are, two gangs.
You're bringing up an interesting point. I just want to jump on it here. You know, that song we were talking about, it started this conversation, it's basically it's been sort of like a unifying thing, you know, a unifying factor. But what do you think would you suggest would be the priorities for a country who's trying to unify to do that? What would be the major points in your opinion?
John, the main thing we have to do, and you cannot do it any other way, and I've been saying this on the program for a while now, if we're not willing to go back to the framers of this country and look at the architectural plan they laid out, this country cannot be brought back from the brink. The crisis cannot be fixed without the framers. And you got a plan of action that had worked well as long as it was used. And what has happened here, and I'm going to prove that by reading to you some things here to show you how far off the mark we are. It was working well until we simply just cast the plan to the four corners of the wind. We've gotten rid of the document that was set in place in Philadelphia. The Constitution of the United States is exactly what Napolitano said. The Constitution of the United States is in exile in this country. They've actually cast to the side, and they're casting aspersion upon it by the way in which they have dismissed it. We're not a constitutional republic in this country. They keep on talking about democracy. And they do that because they want people to believe that that's what's intended by the framers of the country. The framers of the country did not intend a democratic government because they understood that what that is and what it will always be is mob rule, and it's very dangerous. You can go and read Federalist Paper number, the greatest of the Federalist Papers, I think, is number 10, and go read that because that's one that I listened to these other scholars out here, and they just don't get it. That 9 and 10, Federalist Papers 9 and 10 deals with a very critical issue that they had to put to bed in Philadelphia, and that was factions. Now, this blue state and red state, those are factions to me. Those are factions. Blue states, those are the states vote Democrat. Those are the Crips. And then you got those who are in the red states, the Bloods, and they got over here. These are factions that the that the framers were trying to get around and put in place things that restrain factions, because factions are very dangerous. You get over here and you're willing to fight over here because this faction over there is in a different camp, and the two camps are in fact fighting, and they don't see the thing that glues them together is the fact that we're all Americans in this country. We are first and foremost the United States of America. I heard Laura Ingraham talk about this at the convention, Republican convention in Cleveland. I was there. I went there to that. I went to Cleveland, and that had to have been the safest place on the planet at that point in time, because they had brought military from all over the country, different militias, if you will, and they were walking around every so often, coming back around South Carolina, this state and that state. And it was just really great to see how the states were coming together and sharing the responsibility of securing the nation. That's what it's supposed to be. We all are in this experiment together. And the framers had in mind to deal with the idea of factions dividing the country up, meaning the parties. You see, factions they didn't use the word, you won't find the word party they say you don't find the word democracy in the two documents, and you don't. But you don't find the word party in the documents either. And they were they understood the parties are factions, and they did not want to get into these divisional things, because the whole is equal to the sum of all of its parts, and each part is a part of the whole, and therefore the question is, how do you bring them into a camaraderie with each other? You can see that in terms of what Alexander Hamilton did, in terms of the assumption that Hamilton brought about, in terms of the debt that had been incurred during the 7 years of the Revolutionary War that started in 1776, when England decided it was not going to allow the colonies to exercise their privilege of being independent, which they advocated to be independent, first of all, under the umbrella of the king, and then have the autonomy to make their own decisions locally, but to be a part of the umbrella set up by King George III, and try to put that out there as a caveat, as a point of agreement, go midway between independence and being under the tyranny of the king, go midway and say that they could accept autonomy within the empire. And George III thought that was insolence on their part to be talking to him as if he was a stepchild, and he's not going to go for that. And so they decided then, if he could not go along with a compromise position, then they had no other choice but to fight for that position. Now, in fighting for that position, a lot of debt was incurred. And at the end of the 7-year war that went on from 1776 to 1783, at the end of that, they had incurred a tremendous amount of debt. And each state had paid so much based upon the fact that the war was costly. And South Carolina had debt, Massachusetts had debt, all 13 states had debt, and some of the states had paid the debt off, and they were done with it because they were washing their hands of it, because their debt was satisfied. But Hamilton saw that there was a problem here, because if you see it as an individual, that you are handling it as a faction of the whole, and you're just looking at your part in it and not the part of the whole, he saw this as a problem. And what he wanted to do was glue the nation together through the assumption of the debt, where if the debt was not paid off, then in any of the politics, then all of the politics were involved in the debt. And that's the assumption he was talking about in terms of moving as one nation. Now, we can resolve this problem very easily, and that is if these politicians will stop playing on. See, the divisions that we have in the country really are created by politicians. That's why every time I hear a politician talk about they want to unify the nation, every time I hear that, I want to vote against them. That's not true. Politicians do not want to unify this country. They want this country to be divided.
Just like whenever I hear the word bipartisanship, I want to run to the opposite direction. I mean, it's like, oh, so you both want to be in agreements for screwing us over.
Yeah.
That's what you're doing. You know, when you hear the word bipartisanship, it means they say U.S. citizens seriously screwed.
Yeah, one comedian was saying that too. He was saying nothing is more dangerous than Democrats and Republicans working together. Nothing can be more dangerous than that. In terms of working together toward what end? Working together to do the American people in. We need to have the parties up in let's say Washington. What they should be doing in Washington is they're there listening to their constituents and representing the constituents in the House of Representatives. If they would just do that part, but they're not. That's not what they're doing. What they're doing is that they're up there carrying out individual interests and hiding what they're doing up there from the voters, because if the voters knew what they were doing and how much time they're wasting up there, they would not be elected, not 96% like it is right now, where 96% of the ones running for re-election as incumbents are running again, over and over again, and you have these politicians that are career politicians. There should be no career politician. You go there and as the frame is intended, do a service, do the best you can do for a period of time on the problem you want there to work on, and then once you have fired your best shots at the problems, and you've done all you can do toward the rectification of the problems, you go home and back to your jobs. The legislative branches was supposed to have been and was intended to be, even today, is the intention is, look at Article 1, Section 4, is intended to be where it talks about the members of Congress should meet at least once a year. They're not up there to meet every day. You're not working on things that are so that happen so regularly that you have to keep nailing things down. You meet and you go back to your job. I tell you, I was starting to go into New England states, New Hampshire, Vermont. Their legislature, they meet and they finish their business and go home.
We've brought this up. See what happens with go to D.C. It becomes a separate culture, totally cut off from the constituents, and they become self-serving elitist. And
yes.
Another thing is too, I've recommended, if they have to be in D.C. to do this stuff, they should not have private homes. They should have dorms erected with the congressman center set, and they have meeting rooms. And all the meetings for the lobbyists, whatever, has to take place in conference rooms. Everything is recorded 360, recorded and streamed live at the same time, so we can see who they're. And no ex parte conversations on golf courses or country clubs or anything like that. They should not have any dealings with people outside, which is all publicly recorded.
I'm with you on that. I think that we have to rein this power back in and place it back where it belongs, underneath the restraints placed on it by the Constitution of the United States. Don't forget the Constitution is set up. If you read Federalist Paper 51, the Constitution is set up so as to restrain power. See, that's why I argue. And I think I'm the only one making this argument, but I argue that the Constitution is not a Bill of Rights. There's no Bill of Rights in the Constitution. I know people say the first 10 amendments are the Bill of Rights. Show me where you can make a claim. You can make all kinds of claims, but the reason why the first 10 amendments read the way they read is that. And don't forget to put it in there later on, in 1791, the Constitution was ratified in 1788 and drafted in 1787. But the amendments, the first 10 amendments were added in 1791. But if you look at those amendments, I can read them to you if you want me to read them, but I can tell you that those amendments are put there because there were 3 members at the Constitutional Convention that were there at the end. Started with 55. It was 42 of them at the end of the time period from May 25th when it started officially and then ended September the 17th of that year. The 3 members that did not sign it, of the 42 that were there at the end, didn't sign it because they didn't feel that it restrained power enough. That is to say that the separation of powers, and I would argue the separation is not only horizontal, where you have separation Article 1, Article 2, Article 3, and the 3 branches of government have the power separated, but also there's a vertical separation in terms of the 10th Amendment gives powers expressly, states the powers to the federal government and powers that's not allocated to the federal government. Those powers rest and remain with the people and the states they're in which they reside. So those powers are not delegated away from the federal government. And so there's also a separation of powers that are vertical in terms of powers on the federal level and powers on the state level. Now, if the people in government understood this, they will understand you cannot be doing what you're doing to Trump right now. This is an abomination that they're doing, that you have Trump being brought into a state court. If they understood the Constitution, they would not be doing that. Or maybe they would be doing it because they don't have respect for the Constitution. Because I can tell you right now, what they're doing there, that is so constitutionally unacceptable that it really is an outrage to have all these tribunals on different levels trying the President of the United States or the former President of the United States for what he did as president. I'm going to show you that where that cannot be allowed and is constitutionally untenable. If they could read the document and understand it, they would understand you can't do that. You cannot put a president on trial for what he did as president of the United States unless you go through the impeachment process. Now, I'm going to say something here to you scholars. You have to understand the separation of powers and what it does. It places what the separation of powers do or does, because the separation will be the noun, then the other part is the infinity, is a preposition. So the separation, what the separation does is that it puts a hedge around each of the branches of government. The corridor of power over here. And it says expressly in Article 1, it says that the legislative power shall be, listen carefully, Biden, because Biden has said something that's just, and it's an outrage. Biden has said that no amendment is absolute. Now, maybe maybe you don't get offended by that. That's very offensive to the framers. It's very disrespectful to the framers, because the framers were speaking in absolute terms. Why? Because the goal of the Constitution is to chain power down. That's why. That's why the word shall is there in every part of the Constitution except in the 10th Amendment of the Constitution. In every other part of the Constitution, the word shall is there repeatedly. And in half of them, we got 27 amendments in the Constitution, half of them have the word shall in it repeatedly. All of them have the word shall in except Amendment 10, but half of them, and there are 27 amendments, half of them have the word shall in it more than one time. That's how much they were putting the emphasis upon the government shall act in this way, and because the word shall is there, they're saying shall act in this way, and in no other way shall it act. It shall do this. Shall is not should. If it says should do this, then maybe it should do something else too. But when it says shall do this, then shall commands it to be done this way to the exclusion of all other ways in which it could be done. Go read it for yourself. And when Biden said that, he was on very dangerous grounds at that point. That no amendment, this man said no amendment is absolute. And the word shall is in every amendment except Amendment 10. And it's not needed in Amendment 10. Let me read Amendment 10 to you. It's not needed in Amendment 10 because you're setting up the parameters of the two tiers of power, federal power, state power. Here's Amendment 10. Listen to this very carefully. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states, respectively, or to the people. Cut and dried. The states are delegating powers away from themselves, specifically found in Article 1, Section 8, and 18 clauses therein. I'm going to read, I'll read to you Article 1, Section 8, clauses 5 and 6. I want to read those two to you to show you how much we off in terms of what this one guy was saying. The dollar ain't, that word he used, I'm not going to use it here, but the word he used in the song, I want to show you how far we off on that dimension, because I'm going to read to you Article 1, Section 8, clauses 5 and 6. I want to tell you what the Constitution requires there. But when Hamilton was asking for what he calls the assumption of the debt, because they had this paper out there, and the debt was to be retired because that debt the government's supposed to pay its bills as it goes along. It's not supposed to be passing its debt down to the other generation, and passing it on to a generation that inherits a debt that cannot. This has to be unconstitutional, because how can you tax, is what you're doing? You're taxing the generation not even born yet, and so they're certainly not represented. And how are you passing a debt down that they're not even here to incur? You pay the debt off that you incurred during the time that you're there. Those are your debts, you pay it off. So that's what Hamilton's trying to do. And the assumption was to glue the nation together. So it's not just a debt of South Carolina. South Carolina paid the debt off, but Kentucky has a debt. Therefore, that debt that you have there, that debt has to be, that's the country's debt. It's just not South Carolina's debt. It's not just Massachusetts' debt. It's the country's debt. But they see it as individual, and that factional thing is coming up. And Hamilton's trying to nail it down by saying the country has that debt, and you pay that debt off. And the idea was, if you do that, then we're seeing ourselves as a nation and not in these different politics that separate us from each other. And this red state and blue state that we're doing right now is unconscionable in terms of what was intended. I think the Framers would be I don't have to think about it. They would be stunned to find out we got into this red state, blue state stuff. That was one of the founders was talking about, I think it's one of the ones from Virginia, and they were talking about, they were Virginians, and when they were involved in this war, they were saying we're not just Virginians, we are Americans. We are, and when they came out of that room, they were the United States of America. That's what they meant by that, was not this 13 state stuff. They were saying they were United States. Each state, United States of America, the oneness in the in the singularity found in the plurality of the country's founding. They say it's a plural. The states is plural, but in the plural there was to be unity among in the plurality of the country. So the 13 states, now the United States of America. And what they meant by that is a single polity. You could read the document and see they meant by a single polity. But they understood the separateness of the interests involved in it as well. But we were to be the United States of America. And until we understand that and the intention of the framers there and go back to it, you really can't resolve these problems. You can't resolve the way we're doing it right now. The answer is in the framers, in the bosom, rocking my soul in the bosom of Abraham. Well, you could do that in terms of how you unite the church, but you have to understand how you unite the country. Unite the country by uniting around what the intentions were of the framers. You cannot do anything. We have not found, nobody's found anything of how to do it better than they did it in that room. That's why everybody's copying it. That's why the Constitution is the most copied document in the world. They're rising up in Africa right now, in Gabon, in Niger. They're rising up because of the adoption of this document that mimics the document that was founded in 1787. And they're rising up because they understand what's happening there is the same thing that rose up about what was happening here under King George III. There's still the people rising up in the world right now because of that document. They're trying to get their leaders to do what we tried to get the leaders to do back in the Revolutionary War, and we're still trying to get them to do it now and go back to it. You cannot solve the problems of the country. You really can't do anything other than what you're doing right now, floundering out here in the wilderness, trying to find your way back to shores because you're out in the middle of the sea. The document is the only way you can solve the problems of the country, and it cannot be resolved by what we're doing right now. And this blue state, red state stuff that we're involved in, they didn't do that. We did it.
This goes to show you right there that there is such a division, and I would say the red state people, which I think is weird that we're named the red states, because people who advocate for Constitution is considered red, which has actually always been associated with revolutionary thought and violence and all that stuff. But anyway, I don't know why we're the red state. Those who are constitutionally minded are all depicted as red staters, but it just goes to show you that there's so many people that they have the de-emphasis on the Constitution. Which I think most of the people who are the red-minded people, are the ones worried about the Constitution. Say, well, we got to get back to it. The blue people, they're not true blue. They're not loyal. They're not loyal to anything. They constantly want to change anything on a whim. I don't know how to see how they created those colors to represent things. They tied into already existing mindsets of what red represents, and that's always been left-wing radical violence and hatred and all that stuff. That's
if you talk about, I would like to see, you also talk about blue states. Blue states will be more in line because blood is only red when when oxygen is mixed with it. Go look at that blood in those when they take it out of your arm and put it in those bags, you see it's purple. Now, since you bleed out and don't bleed in, when you get cut, you see the blood is red. It looks red because it's mixed with the oxygen. The oxygen, it's mixed with the oxygen. It's not pure. It's not purified anymore. But the purity of the blood is really purple. So red states and purple states would be better because both of them have to do with the fact that we all, how they say, we're all red-blooded Americans. We're red-blooded Americans. That means true blue. That means that you are dealing with the unity of the country as a single polity. We are all one people. And if you work on that, then all the other things that we are fighting about can be resolved because we understand that the unity is that we are Americans trying to resolve the problems. I think that I really think that MAGA is trying to make the country great again. But the opposition that it has is that there are people, quite frankly, that don't have that as their agenda, who see it as a threat to what they're doing, because they're not trying to make the country great. They're trying to assume power so as to carry out personal agendas. We got past that stuff by coming together as in Philadelphia, trying to glue the nation together by the different interests that were represented there. They had to find a way to bring all these politics under one umbrella. And they did a brilliant job of it because they understood they had separate interests there. But the point was, how do you bridge the gap between them? And they had a big problem with a number of things. The large states and small states, they had to glue that together. They did that by the bicameral legislative branch of government. And they had a problem with the states that practiced slavery and those that didn't practice slavery, and they found a way to get that resolved. And how did they do that? They did it by, in fact, in Article 1, Section 9, with the slave trade. They knew that persons were hands-on about their slaves. So they then knew they couldn't mess with that in that generation. So they allowed that to go on untouched for 20 years, and after a 20-year period of time, you could then pass a law against the slave trade. And if you go read the Constitution, you'll see that it sets up no touching of the slave trade for 20 years. And after that, then it could be tampered with in terms of restricting. And that's what they did in 1808. They couldn't touch it between 1787 and 1807. They couldn't touch it because it was prohibited from being touched. But after 1807, they could pass a law against it, and they did that to prohibit the slave trade in 1808. Let me read that to you, because I think a lot of persons misunderstand that, talking about how they get confused about the 3/5 clause in the Constitution. Let me read to you Article 1, Section 9, and let you see what that is about. I'm going to read you a couple of parts of the Constitution, because we need to understand it a little bit better than we do. And these scholars that I hear talking about it, I don't see any evidence to understand it. I don't think Alan Dershowitz understands it. Let me read this to you. And let you see here that the migration or importation of such persons, they were too embarrassed to say slaves. They were too embarrassed to even use the word. As any of the states now existing shall think proper to admit, shall not be prohibited by the Congress prior to the year 1808. Should not be prohibited from the importation of those persons prior to 1808. The document is being drafted in 1787 so that the respite in terms of addressing that issue of slavery and the slave trade, that nobody can touch it for that 20-year period of time. After that, the slave trade can be prohibited based upon Article 1, Section 9, Clause 1 of the Constitution. So they remedied that problem by allowing it, but placing in there it can be restrained, the slave trade can be restrained after one generation has passed. So how old are the slave owners? Let's say 30, 40 years old. Okay, 20 years later, 60 years old, and what's the lifespan at that point? That generation is dying off, and therefore the weakening of that ownership will allow it then to be addressed at a later date, but not necessarily at this point in time. So they fixed that problem through Article 1, Section 9. But they're fixing things because the idea there was to glue the nation together so as to have one polity and speaking in one voice where all the common interests are in fact being served by being the United States of America. And you have to do that by, in fact, finding out where the divisional points are and fixing that. And that's what they were doing. Did a very brilliant job of it, if you understand the document. Now, in 1808, they can now pass a law against the slave trade, and Congress passes a law against it. They passed a law against the slave trade. The slave trade was outlawed in 1808 in this country. And slavery was intended to die out of its own weight, so that if you're not importing any slaves, the idea would be that you would have then slavery going out of existence. But what was happening then is that there was internal slave trade was going on, not intended by the framers, but the person found a way to get around. The intention was to get it to outlaw it, to get it out of the of a country that claimed in the Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal. They stated that in the document. All men are created equal. It didn't say some men. All men are created equal. That they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. All men are endowed. And that to secure those rights, they set government among men to secure the rights that all men have based upon their humanity. That's the framers talking. Now, what we've done with it in the aftermath of that is what we've done with it. Look what we've done to this framers song. But don't blame the framers for that. The framers were trying to put in place those things that would help us to be a prosperous nation, the posterity of the country, and they were trying to pass things down that would allow us to have this country peaceful and existing with its members. And therefore, you would not have Oliver Anthony singing about it today. But he's singing about it because we fell short of the mark of what was put in place. He's actually singing a patriotic song in the context of what the framers had intended. I don't see him as some see him as a conservative or a liberal. I see him as a patriot. He's singing that's a patriotic song. And he's talking about the rich men north of Richmond. Who are those persons? Well, look at Richmond, Virginia, and then look at where the men north of that. Who are those men north of Richmond? The ones in Washington singing about. Washington, D.C. is north of Richmond, and he's singing about what they are doing in terms of they wanted. He's talking about they're involved in all all your business. They're involved in everything. They want to know what you think. They want to know what you do. And he's singing against that because he knows that that's not what was intended by the countries that are framed. They did not intend to have the government this intrusive. The government was intended to be limited and restrained based upon the separation of powers on the federal level, Article 1, Article 2, Article 3, and the separation therein, and then the vertical separation of powers by Amendment 10 that puts certain limits upon the federal government, and then it puts certain limits upon the government because it's not delegated to them to do certain things that's therefore not delegated. Therefore, those are things that remains with the states. The 10th Amendment says as much in terms of stating that those rights, those powers, that's not delegated away from the states, are retained by the states. The 10th Amendment makes that very clear. So that amendment doesn't have the word shall in it. It just simply says these are the powers the federal government has. Those are not delegated to the federal government. They retain those rights, those powers remain with the states. Now, I don't agree with scholars that claim that, and this is what Alexander Hamilton claimed. Alexander Hamilton claimed that there are implied powers. There are no implied powers in the Constitution. there are implications of the language in the Constitution. I'm going to read one of them to you. That is an implication of the language that's expressed. And if you can understand the implication of that language I'm going to read to you in Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7, then they'll understand that they cannot do what they're doing to Trump. Cannot be done by the Constitution. I'm going to read that to you, but I'm going to read. Let me read when he talks about the dollars is not anything. Let me read something about that first, and then I'll read to you Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7. But let me read Article 1, Section 8, Clauses 5 and 6. Let me read that first. And let me see what that says. If I'm wrong here, I'll eat the language in the Constitution. So Article 1, Section 8, Clauses 5 and 6. Okay, let's see what that says. Article 1, Section 8, Clauses 5 and 6. Let's see if I'm right here. I am right. But let me read it. Okay, they don't have it itemized here, so I have to count it down it's not numbered here. In some texts, it's numbered, so you can go to 5 and 6, but I'll have to count it down here, but I'll get to 5 and 6. So Article 1, Section 8, that's Clause 1, Clause 2, Clause 3, Clause 4, Clause 5, okay? Clause 5 says this. Listen very carefully. He's talking about the dollar here, not anything, right? Here's what 5 says. It says, it's talking about Congress, the powers of Congress. Clause 5, Congress has a power in Clause 5, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 5 says to coin money, regulate the value thereof, and of foreign coin, and fix a standard of weight and measure. So Congress have the power to coin money. So what is money? Oliver Anthony is railing against the money is not anything, but that's not money. That's currency. Money is to be coined. And if you're going to print currency, it must be based upon the coinage. What you have now, and the reason why there's no value in it, and that's why he's railing against it, is because the currency is not based on anything. It's just printed paper. And the reason why that's true is because we went off the gold standard in 1971. That's a whole different discussion right there, and we need to understand why that happened in 1971, because the government went off of the gold standard because it could not sustain what it had done behind people's back. Just printing paper, more and more paper being printed out there based upon nothing other than you can change the paper for other paper, but you could not change it for gold. And once that people were demanding the gold for the currency, and they couldn't meet that, they had to go off of it and admit that they were in fact doing things they should not have been doing in the first place and should not have been out there printing all that paper. But it says here to print it. Now listen what it says. That's Article 1, Section 8, Clause 5. Now listen to what it says in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 6. Okay? To coin money, regulate the value thereof, and if foreign coins, and the weight of it therein. And then 6 says this. Listen carefully, you members of Congress. To provide for the punishment of counterfeiting the securities and the current coins of the United States. to counterfeit the coin of the United States, to punish for the counterfeiting of the money supply. And they have done that. All of them. That's what we have right now. We have the violation of the terms of Article 1, Section 8, Clause 5, and the violation of Article 1, Section 8, Clause 6. Because the money is supposed to be the coinage. If you're going to print currency, the currency can only exist legally is based upon the coinage. Right now, the dollar is based upon what? Other dollars. If you go to the bank and ask for an exchange of the $20 bill, they can give you 4 5s, 2 10s, or 21s, but they're not going to exchange gold for it. And that's unconstitutional based upon Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, because the coinage, money is to be coined. If you don't have coinage in back of the currency, you don't have money. You have currency, and the currency is illegal. All the currency out here right now that we have, all that's illegal based upon the Constitution of the United States. Now, let me just say one word before we get off the air about what's happening to Donald Trump. In Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7, let me find that. And here's what it says, Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7. See, there are no implied powers in the Constitution. There's language, you have to understand the implication of the language. There are no implied powers. Hamilton was wrong on that. In Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7, it says this. Judgment in cases of impeachment shall not extend further than the removal from office and disqualification to hold any or enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States. But the party convicted shall be, nevertheless, be liable and subject to indictment, trial, judgment, and punishment according to law. The implication of that is that unless the person in office subject to impeachment is impeached and convicted, there can be no trial of what the president did when the president was in office. And why is that? Because of the hedge around the president based upon the separation of powers. In order to bring the president to trial for what he did as president, you must therefore remove that hedge from around the presidency by impeaching and convicting the president. And that's what the implication is of the language in Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7 of the Constitution. I'm right, and anyone that says different, they're wrong. What do you scholars think about that? Because until you understand that, and every one of you scholars out here that have the television and so on, you can speak to this illegality of what they're doing to Trump right now if you understood the document, because that cannot be done. You can't have the President of the United States being tried in all these levels of government as they're doing. All that's unconstitutional. By Article 1, Section 3, Clause 6, and Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7. I'm right, and all you scholars should be out there speaking out against this travesty. And John was asking the question. I'll tell you, there's only one thing we can do. If we don't get back to the framers, you cannot solve this problem. And if you don't get back to them, this country is going down the tube, because we've left the things that keep this country on the right track, and that's what was put in place in Philadelphia. The framers are the answer to it. There is no other answer. Okay, have a nice, graceful Labor Day. Hope you enjoy your family. On the last barbecue day, that's in our family, I got up this morning, barbecue. Last barbecue day of the year until next year, officially, quote unquote. Hope you'll have a great day, Labor Day. Let's use it to think about and reflect about where the country is going, because where we're going right now is not intended by what they did in Philadelphia. We got to get back to the framers of this country. There's no other out for this country. The framers are the answer. Okay, until next week, I want you to follow your dream. If you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.